Integration of African Americans, Our Biggest Regret, Recognizing Our Failures by Destiny Nesbitt. What is integration and how did it start? Integration is the blending of one group of people into another whole. Beginning in the United States on May 17, after the passing of the 14th Amendment, which declared that segregated schools were unconstitutional. The purpose of integration. Integration was first incorporated into schools and then everyday life to ensure that all resources would be given equally to both black and white children. The way to ensure that was placing black children into white schools. The claims is that African Americans needed to be in segregated schools because of the lack of resources that they had, but in reality, it was the lack of resources they were receiving. School funding was given to white schools, and the scraps were left to black children. In reality, the lack of funding was just to continue the damage that was done to African Americans from slavery. It was the fear that they would secede against adversity. This was the real fear. What I show you here is basically a picture of African Americans in a room of themselves with their own black teachers. And I think that this was the real fear. They didn't want to see them secede on their own. What integration really was for African Americans. Integration was created to stop the progression of African Americans. In the South, there were segregated schools that thrived. They were community funded and had teachers who had doctorates, and students received more than adequate educations. It became apparent that with correct resources, black schools would be content without white interruption. Whites realized this and knew that they would have to get ahead of their success. Continuation. The idea that blacks could be successful independent of whites was enough to get them to declare segregation unconstitutional. The fear was that with proper education and resources that the black community would flourish and possibly be more successful than white communities. Even scarier to whites is that blacks would no longer be the component of them making money because they would have their own agenda to take care of. They didn't want to see blacks build their own dreams but instead contribute to white success. This is a lot of what we see today. Instead, we see blacks in low-paying jobs that contribute to the dreams of whites. For example, the owner of Apple makes tons and tons and tons of money, giving him billions of dollars. However, there are blacks and other minorities as well, and just white people in general, that work and contribute to that dream for $15 an hour. And it's almost as if they wanted them to just continue to let them make money while they wouldn't make any for themselves. So this image I have for you right here is another class of all black children. And I write, knowing that their history couldn't be instructed and retaught by white teachers created fear. Knowing that teachers would describe to them the brutal truth of what their grandparents suffered and what they've lost would create too much of a fire in these children. Learning it from teachers that look just like them would create too much of a fire. It would create a candid classroom. What I mean by this is complete and utter honesty. These kids can talk in a room within themselves and not have to worry if they're offending the next child because they all have the same past. So this is the literary element. A relationship between community and schools by Emily Siddle, she reveals a truth that many hadn't known. She shed light on African American schools in the South that were successful, independent of whites. She even shares the key to their success, which is the fact that resources came directly from the African American communities. There's been a narrative that circled around that all African American schools did poorly. In reality, they did poorly because the students were given bikes without pedals. What I mean by this is they were expected to go far without any pedals. As you know, a bike can't go anywhere if it doesn't have pedals. So basically they gave them the setup, and I do this with quotations, but they didn't really expect them to go anywhere. It's like they're playing a game of chess, but they already knew all the moves. One could speculate that if all schools received the same resources, they would all be successful. Jelani Cobbs, author of New York Times article, The Failure of Desegregation, reveals to the reader that blacks wanted fairness before integration. He states, attempting to force school districts to uphold the latter part of separate but equal proved to be a failure. After realizing this was a failure, the NAACP would have to attack segregation in itself. This reveals that they were not willing to give blacks the power to educate themselves, but instead would leave it up to whites to decide the futures of blacks and how they should be educated. So basically, this part is intended to show you that blacks didn't really want to not be segregated, but instead they just wanted to be able to have the same resources. The fact that they were getting lesser of everything contributed to their downfall. It's almost like they weren't at an even playing field. It's like you being able to start 100 miles before me, be 100 miles ahead of me, and then expect me to catch up. I can't catch up if I don't have the right equipment, and then that's, this is in the case of blacks. So this is my personal perspective. So I live in a time period where racism, of course, more hidden but widely apparent. I've never attended a school where there was a majority of black teachers. In fact, they didn't even make up half of the teachers there. I can count on my hand the amount of black teachers I had. In fact, it was 5 within my whole school career, since pre-K. I'll be the first to say that all teachers are different and that I've enjoyed teachers of all races, but in the classes that I had black teachers, the connection was different. I like to point out that in my whole school career, I only had 5 black teachers because I think that's so crazy. I know there's a lot more black teachers. And I think that there should be more black teachers. I think that the teachers that I had that were black really impacted me differently. I don't know, it was like, at least for me, and I know this isn't for every child, but it was like, I had more of a desire to impress them. They were women, all of them. And it was like maybe they had that motherly effect. So I knew that I wanted to do well for them. And I knew that they were counting on me to do well. And I think there's just a different feeling when you have a teacher that's the same race as you. So, seeing someone who has a similar upbringing as you, who wants you to succeed because they understand what it means in this country to not do well as a black child is vital. It's the extra understanding, the ability to relate to the child makes all of a difference, provided teachers aren't paid to break the threshold and give that extra support, but those who do have a special place in my heart. Coincidentally, or not so much of a coincidence, has been my black teachers. Again, not to say white teachers can't. It's always appreciated, just different. So yeah, I incorporate this picture of just like I think probably a black principal in a room full of her black students. And I just feel like that's such an important image to see. It's funny, I forgot to reference that when I was younger, I went to, it wasn't an all-black school, but black kids made up the majority of the school. I had a great principal. His name was was it? I can't even remember, but he was a doctor, and he really fought for kids in like low-funded areas, black kids, minorities, and the school had received so much funding. He had took the school from a school that was about to be shut down, but instead into a school that was getting funding. We had TVs in the freaking cafeteria, and like the opening of the school. And I think that's because he fought so hard for us. In addition to having everything we needed, a big library, everyone had books, computers, laptops, MacBooks at a time where, it was rare to see all that in a school. Knowing that he was fighting for us because he knew that if we weren't successful, that we would just be another stereotype. So my findings. I asked 20 African-American 12th graders if having a black teacher impacted them more positively than any other race. 18 out of 20 answered yes. These findings show me that having all black schools will prove to impact black children and communities in a positive way, possibly influencing more to go to school and continue to go on and achieve a higher education. Even more likely, leave them with a positive feeling towards school. Learning that 18 out of 20 people felt like this was true only proves my point that we need more black teachers, and that if segregation would have continued with proper funding, that blacks would be just as successful as whites. But they knew that because everything that happens in this country is for a reason. In almost all of our history units, we can see the way blacks were held down. And just because it's not in chains anymore and it's not by slavery doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It's meant to be kept a secret. And if you're willing to take the blinders off that they put you on, and the blinders is that idea that if you think this deeply and you think that, oh, having a black school is a good idea, they will try to make it seem as if you're racist. Or if you were like they just want to make you seem so radical for just wanting to be around your own people, for wanting to learn within yourself, to have a space where you can talk candidly, where I don't have to feel bad about saying these things, where I don't feel like I'm offending someone. I'll tell you this, it's so much easier talking behind this camera just by myself. Why? Because I don't have to look and see the faces people make at me saying that, yeah, we should have stayed segregated. They would feel like I'm damn near a black Nazi. Okay. What needs to be done? So it is obviously unlikely that we can't change what has been done and choose to keep segregation. Instead, we should recognize that blacks wanting their own schools isn't a bad thing, what I stated, but instead a way to positively impact the children's lives, a way to create a safe space with people who truly understand them. A room full of peers that look like you could potentially change the way you think of them yourself. Further on, black neighborhoods, aka impoverished neighborhoods, need more funding for their schools and more opportunities need to be created for blacks. I think this is 100% true. I think that we do need more funding. I think the reason why HBCUs cost so much money is because they don't receive the funding. And the reason why they keep going is because the people who run them know that black schools are essential. I would 100% be in a black school if the tuition wasn't as much money. I think for me personally, though I've been able to blend in environments that weren't all black, that if I were in an environment where people look like me, I would thrive as well as a whole bunch of other kids. Because it's just, I'll tell you this, it's a different feeling. So yeah. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. Thanks for watching.